Chapter 3. The Manager's Changing Work, Environment, and Ethical Responsibilities. Doing the right thing. It's a total of 34 slides. Major questions you should be able to answer. Is profit the only important goal of a business? Who are the stakeholders important to me inside the organization? Who are the stakeholders important to me inside and outside the organization? And what does the successful manager need to know about ethics and values? Is being socially responsible really necessary? And how can I trust that a company is doing the right thing? Triple bottom line: people, planet, and profit. This is an important concept that's brought into this chapter. The triple bottom line represents people, planet, and profit, the 3 Ps. It measures an organization's social, environmental, and financial performance. Those 3 performance metrics: social, environmental, financial. Success can be measured through a social audit, a systematic assessment of a company's performance in implementing socially responsible programs. In this view of a corporate performance, an organization has a responsibility to its employees and to the wider community, people. An organization is committed to sustainable green environmental practices for the planet and includes the cost of pollution, worker displacement, and other factors in its financial calculations. Profits. These are matters that rank high in the minds of many of today's consumers. Millennials, right? 2 scholars have done research in this area, appear to be more interested in living lives defined by meaning than by what some would call happiness. They report being less focused on financial success than they are on making a difference. In support of this view, various studies have found that the principal factor young adults ages 21 to 31 wanted in a successful career was a sense of meaning. Another study finds that millennials who came of age during the 2007 to 2009 Great Recession reported more concern for others and less interest in material goods. They also want a work and life balance. In this slide here, the community of stakeholders looks like a dartboard. On the outermost shell, I'll call it, or like a molecule, the outermost shell, we have the general environment, and then we have the task environment, and then most in the middle here, internal stakeholders, the employees, owners, and board of directors. So we have 2 different types of stakeholders: external stakeholders and internal stakeholders. Stakeholders are the people whose interests are affected by an organization's activities. It includes anyone who's affected, not just the people who have stock in the company or organization. So again, stakeholders are the people whose interests, all the peoples whose interests are affected by an organization's activities. They consist both internal stakeholders and external stakeholders, and we discuss them on the next few slides. So in short, general environment on the outermost shell, economic forces, these are the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 forces: economic, technological, sociocultural, demographic, political, legal, and international forces. The task environment consists of customers, competitors, suppliers, distributors, allies, unions, lenders, governments, interest groups, media. And then the internal stakeholders we see are the employees, owners, and the board of directors. Next, we have internal stakeholders. Internal stakeholders defined, they consist of employees, owners, and board of directors, like the previous slide stated. Owners consist of all those who can claim the organization as their legal property. Board of directors, they're members elected by the stockholders to see that the company is being run according to their interests. We have to note the difference between stakeholders and stockholders. We should have done that in the first video, chapter 1, but you can go ahead and define those different those different terms, and you should know the difference between stakeholders and stockholders. Stockholders are stakeholders, but there are stakeholders that are not necessarily stockholders. Internal stakeholders are all of the people who work within the organization. Employees, owners, and board of directors are all internal stakeholders. External stakeholders. They also greatly influence an organization. The task environment consists of 11 groups that impact an organization. They are discussed on the following slides, and they include customers, competitors, suppliers, distributors, strategic allies, employee organizations, local communities, financial institutions, government regulators, special interest groups, and mass media. The general environment refers to the macro environment. They are discussed after the task environment and include economic, technological, sociocultural, demographic, political, legal, and international forces. So again, external stakeholders are the people or groups in the organization's external environment that are affected by it. The task environment consists of 11 groups that present an organization with daily tasks to handle. And the general environment refers to the macro environment, such as economic, technological, and socio-cultural forces. The task environment. Customers, those who pay to use an organization's good or service. Competitors are people or organizations that compete for customers or for service. Suppliers they provide raw materials, services, equipment, labor, or energy to other organizations. Distributors are people or organizations that help another organization sell its goods and services to customers. An example used in the textbook: Jeff Bezos, founder and CEO of Amazon.com, is obsessed with customer service. He believes that a company's success is driven by the customer experience. In 2014, the company grew to $107 billion. Can any students identify ways that these groups might influence an organization? It's a good question to ask yourself if you can. The task environment continued. Strategic allies. The relationship of two organizations who join forces to achieve advantages neither can perform as well alone. Employee organizations, labor unions, and professional associations. Local communities. They may institute clawbacks or rescinding tax breaks when firms don't deliver promised jobs. May engage in crowdfunding, raising money for a project by obtaining small amounts of money from many people in the crowd. Can any students identify ways that these groups might influence an organization? Another good question. And the last slide on task environment. Financial institutions, banks, savings and loans, and credit unions. Government regulators, regulatory agencies that establish ground rules under which organizations may operate. Special interest groups, groups whose members try to influence specific issues. We see that a lot in politics. And mass media, the power of print, radio, TV, and the internet on an organization's news, both good and bad. And we saw a lot of mass media influence on the last general election, where we saw President Trump elected. Question. Two drug companies agree to work together to pool their research and develop funds to develop a new drug for arthritis. In doing so, these two organizations have A. Formed a union, B. Formed a strategic alliance, C. Analyzed their internal environment, or D. Influenced the mass media. Well, two different drug companies, they agree to work together to pool research and development funds, and in doing so, they develop a new drug for arthritis. In doing so, these two organizations have Formed a union? No. Formed a strategic alliance? Yes. The correct answer is B. We look at C. Analyze their internal environment. Yes, they have, but the best answer to go with here is formed a strategic alliance. And influence the mass media? That wouldn't be correct. The rationale behind this answer is these organizations have joined together to achieve an advantage that neither could perform as well alone. So one company may have been really far ahead in research, the other in development, and they pool together their funds and they come up with a whole new product that neither one could have produced on its own. That there is an example of the formation of a strategic alliance. And this the difficulty of this question was classified as hard. Next, Chemtech International is being picketed by a group of people who live by their biggest plant. Okay, so these are people in their environment that live close to Chemtech International. The group is concerned about Chemtech's disposal of waste products into nearby waterways. Okay. In this instance, Chemtech is dealing with the blank part of its blank environment. A. In this instance, Chemtech is dealing with the special interest groups part of its task environment. Incorrect. B. In this instance, Chemtech is dealing with the local communities part of its task environment. This is correct. We look at C and D, why they're not correct. In these instances, it's dealing with the social, cultural, no, part of its general or task. The task part is correct of its environment, but it's local communities. The rationale behind this is local communities are most likely to be concerned about this issue. Rightfully so. They're being picketed by a group of people who live by their biggest plant. And their biggest plant would be naturally the biggest producer of waste that needs to be disposed. And how they're disposing of the waste is the major concern of the local community. And thus, answer B, or selection B, would be correct. And they provide the local community, they provide problems for managers to deal with on a daily basis. Next question. The Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, administers environmental standards in the United States. The EPA represents the blank part of the organization's blank. So A, local communities and task environment. That's incorrect. The EPA, we look at the question, the Environmental Protection Agency administers environmental standards in the United States. They administer the standards in the U.S. So, of course, they're going to administer environmental standards in local communities and financial institutions or special interest group. But the best question here, or the best selection here, is government regulators. They work for the government. It's a government agency. Okay? So, the EPA represents the government regulators, part of the organization's task environment. Task environment is the correct answer for this second part. It's not part of the internal environment or the external environment. It's part of the task environment, and they're government regulators. Anytime that we see that the question states that such an agency or department, they regulate in the United States as a whole, they are government regulators. The rationale, OSHA is a government agency that managers may have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And these last three questions were ranked difficulty hard. The general environment. In addition to the task environment, organizations must also be concerned with the general environment. Can any students identify ways that these forces might influence an organization? Let's look at these three forces here. Economic forces. They consist of the general economic conditions and trends: unemployment, inflation, interest rates, economic growth. Technological forces are the new developments and methods for transforming resources into goods and services. Socio-cultural forces, influences, and trends originating in a country's, a society's, or a culture's human relationships and values that may affect an organization. Next, demographic forces, influences on an organization arising from changes in the characteristics of a population, such as age, gender, or ethnic origin. Political legal forces, changes in the way politics shape laws and laws shape the opportunities for and threats to an organization. And lastly, international forces. These are the changes in the economic, political, legal, and technological global system that may affect an organization. And again, we ask, can any students identify ways that these forces might influence an organization? The ethical responsibilities required of you as a manager. An ethical dilemma can be defined or described as a situation in which you have to decide whether to pursue a course of action that may benefit you or your organization, but that is unethical or even illegal. Pictured here, phony financier R. Allen Stafford. He was sentenced to 110 years in prison for a $7 billion Ponzi scheme. Scumbag. Solving ethical dilemmas is an important skill, according to a recent study. Presented in the textbook, an investigation of 400 senior executives and 455 college students revealed that 62% of the students believed that they were well prepared to deal with ethical judgments, whereas only 30% of executives see students as prepared. Interesting. Defining ethics and values. Ethics, standards of right and wrong that influence behavior, may vary among countries and cultures. That's big. As we look further into globalization, we can see the difference in ethics among the countries, where some may have varying views of what would be considered as a gift or conflict of interest. Values, relatively permanent and deeply held underlying beliefs and attitudes that help determine a person's behavior. In what ways can ethics differ? People rely on values, which are relatively permanent beliefs that may influence their ethical behavior. This means that some behavior may be viewed as ethical by some, but unethical by others. Can students see why some doctors may believe that their attendance at a pharmaceutical presentation with a top-dollar supper might be a useful educational experience, while other doctors may believe that it is a bribe? Defining ethical behavior depends on a lot of a person's value system. For example, in the textbook, this photo refers to sunshine on gifts. Some doctors may say that medicine changes so rapidly that they rely on drug companies and fellow medical doctors to keep them up to date, such as through presentations at medical society dinners financed by pharmaceutical companies. However, the Physician Payment Sunshine Act now requires that pharmaceutical companies report meals, travel expenses, grants, lecture fees, drug samples, and other gifts to physicians. Do you think such disclosures are necessary? Absolutely. Conflicting values. Organizations may have two value systems that conflict. 1. The value system stressing financial performance versus 2. The value system stressing cohesion and solidarity in employee relationships. Ask your students how a value system stressing financial performance could conflict with a value system stressing cohesion and solidarity in employee relationships. Consider showing a McGraw-Hill video focusing on ethics and people at Whole Foods, a 9-minute, 12-second video. Link will be provided in the description of the below. Can students see how Whole Foods has a value system stressing cohesion and solidarity? Can they see how ethics is at the forefront of this business? Interesting how Whole Foods is now owned by Amazon. 4 approaches to deciding ethical dilemmas. The first, the utilitarian approach. The utilitarian approach. The utilitarian approach, guided by what will result in the greatest good for the greatest number of people, often associated with financial performance. Do students believe that decisions should be guided by what will result in the greatest good for the greatest number of people? In what ways can this be problematic for an organization to adhere to? An example. Firing thousands of employees may improve the bottom line and provide immediate benefits for stockholders. However, this action may damage workforce morale and lead to the loss of employees with experience and skills. The next approach, the individual approach, guided by what will result in the individual's best long-term interest, which ultimately is in everyone's self-interest, assumes that people will act ethically in the short run to avoid harm in the long run. Flaw is one person's short-term gain may not be good for everyone in the long term. Do students believe that people will make good decisions based on the individual approach? In what ways can this be successful? For example, if you are caught stealing, you go to jail. Therefore, you don't steal. In what ways can this be less successful? For example, would a serial criminal have the values needed to make the decision not to steal? An example. The manager of an agribusiness that puts chemical fertilizers on the crops every year will always benefit, but the fishing industries downstream could ultimately suffer if chemical runoff reduces the number of fish. The third approach, the moral rights approach, guided by respect for the fundamental rights of human beings, the right of life, liberty, privacy, health, safety, and due process. For example, the United States Constitution's Bill of Rights. Do students realize that their employers can monitor their emails? For example, does this conflict with their moral right to privacy? In what other ways can moral rights conflict at work? An example, the difficulty is when rights are in conflict, such as employer and employee rights. Should employees on the job have a guarantee of privacy? Actually, it is legal for employers to listen to business phone calls and monitor all non-spoken personal communications. Absolutely, especially in federal positions. They can, at any time, pull or audit your emails for the purposes of an investigation. You may have heard of some, but there are definitely examples in the federal government. And one case that involves former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, where she did not use government email, and she actually used her personal email for correspondence, and that was really frowned upon, especially during the election time. And the final, fourth approach to deciding ethical dilemmas, the justice approach, guided by respect for impartial standards of fairness and equity, Policies administered impartially and fairly, regardless of gender, age, sexual orientation, and the like. Can students think of any examples of organizations that seem to have violated the justice approach? An example: fairness can often be an issue. Employees may be resentful when a corporation's CEO is paid a salary and bonuses worth hundreds of times more than what they receive, even when the company performs poorly. Absolutely, that's a problem. Question: Pat, a manager at State University, is deciding how to set up a procedure for registering online that gives students fair access to courses. Pat is engaged in the blank approach. Of the four approaches: A, utilitarian; B, individual; C, moral rights; or D, justice. The correct answer is D, justice approach. Pat is guided by respect for impartial standards of fairness and equity. The Sarbanes-Oxley Reform Act. White-collar crime. Illegal trading, Ponzi schemes, and other white-collar crimes dominated the headlines in the early 21st century. Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 established requirements for proper financial record keeping for public companies, penalties of as much as 25 years in prison for non-compliance. An array of scandals in the 21st century led to the passing of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, sometimes called Sarbox or SOX, S-O-X. SOX requires a company's CEO and CFO to personally certify the organization's financial reports, prohibits them from taking personal loans or lines of credit, and makes them reimburse the organization for bonuses and stock options when required by restatement of corporate profits. It also requires the company to have established procedures and guidelines for audit committees. How do people learn ethics? Kohlberg's 3 levels of personal moral development. Level 1, pre-conventional. Level 2, conventional. And level 3, post-conventional. One psychologist, Lawrence Kohlberg, has proposed 3 levels of personal moral development: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. Level 1, pre-conventional, follows rules. People who have achieved this level tend to follow rules and to obey authority to avoid unpleasant consequences. Managers of the level 1 sort trend to be autocratic or coercive, expecting employees to be obedient for obedience's sake. So again, level 1 follows rules to avoid unpleasant consequences. Level 2, conventional, follows expectations of others. Most managers are at this level. People whose moral development has reached this level are conformist but not slavish, generally adhering to the expectations of others in their lives. Level 2 managers lead by encouragement and cooperation and are more group and team-oriented. Most managers are at this level. Level 3, post-conventional, guided by internal values. They lead by example. The farthest along in moral development, level 3 managers, are independent souls who follow their own values and standards, focusing on the needs of their employees and trying to lead by empowering those working for them. Only about 1/5 of American managers reach this level. How organizations can promote ethics. Managers can promote strong ethical climates through the policies, procedures, and practices that are used on a daily basis. Companies can screen prospective employees through resume and reference checks, or use personality or integrity testing to identify potential dishonest people. A code of ethics is a written set of ethical guidelines on how to treat customers, suppliers, competitors, and other stakeholders. According to the Society for Human Resource Management weekly survey, 32% of human resource professionals indicated that their organizations offered ethics training. A whistleblower is an employee or even an outside consultant who reports organizational misconduct to the public, such as health and safety matters, waste, and corruption. Whistleblowing has been on the rise since the Great Recession, and the number of whistleblower tips received by the Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, for example, is now nearly 4,000 a year. Whistleblowers are protected by law. However, retaliation is also a reality, ranging from giving them a cold shoulder to passing them over for promotion. That is why it is important to create an organizational culture that promotes ethical behavior and protects potential whistleblowers. So, in short, how organizations can promote ethics: 1. Create a strong ethical climate. 2. Screen prospective employees. 3. Instituting ethics codes and training programs. And 4. Protecting whistleblowers who report organizational misconduct. The social responsibilities required of you as a manager. Social responsibility: manager's duty to take actions that will benefit the interests of society as well as of the organization. And corporate social responsibility: the notion that corporations are expected to go above and beyond following the law and making a profit. If ethical responsibility is about being a good individual citizen, social responsibility is about being a good organizational citizen, taking on organizational citizenship behaviors that exceed employees' job descriptions, such as altruism, courtesy, sportsmanship, conscientiousness, and civic virtue. Do students feel that money is the be-all and end-all in business? Are there other issues that businesses should be concerned about? Can they give examples? An example: sustainability or philanthropy. Figure 3.2 from the text: Carroll's Global Corporate Social Responsibility Pyramid. According to University of Georgia business scholar Archie B. Carroll, corporate social responsibility rests at the top of the pyramid of a corporation's obligations, right up there with economic, legal, and ethical obligations. Some people might hold that a company's first and only duty is to make a profit. However, Carroll suggests that responsibilities of an organization in the global economy should take the following priorities, with profit being the most fundamental base of the pyramid and corporate citizenship at the top. Where do students believe that the most organizations are in terms of Carroll's pyramid? We look closely at the pyramid. At the top, philanthropic responsibility. Be a good global corporate citizen. Do what is desired by global stakeholders. Ethical responsibility. Be ethical. Do what is expected by global stakeholders. Legal responsibility. Obey the law. Do what is required by global stakeholders. And economic responsibility. Be profitable. Do what is required by global capitalism. Types of social responsibility. There are two primary types of social responsibility noted in the textbook: sustainability and philanthropy. Today, sustainability, an example, going green, has entered the business mainstream, where sustainability programs are producing not only environmental benefits, but also cost saving, revenue growth, and competitive advantages. Where driving natural capital to its lowest levels ever in human history, says Stanford University ecologist Gretchen Daly. According to this view, we are approaching the planet's limitations, with human activity threatening to exceed the Earth's capacity to generate resources and absorb wastes. Sustainability and the business of green hopes to reverse this trend. Sustainability is described as economic development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Natural capital is described as the value of natural resources such as topsoil, air, water, and genetic diversity, which humans depend on. In 2016 poll, 70% of Americans believe climate change causes extreme weather, a rise in sea level. And just recently here, in June 2019, as I make this video, there was a recent increase in iceberg melting, or ice melting in Greenland. And there's been some pretty gnarly statistics that were revealed from the researchers in the area about the amount of sea ice that actually melted. And I believe it was in the billions of gallons, to give an approximate answer. But that was shared on CNN again in June 2019. Another type of social responsibility, as discussed previously, philanthropy. It's another very important social responsibility. As steel magnate Andrew Carnegie famously said in the 19th century, "He who dies rich dies thus disgraced." The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has pledged to spend billions on health, education, and overcoming poverty worldwide. The text considers showing a McGraw-Hill video titled "Cell Phones for Soldiers," showcasing philanthropy and ethics, 10-minute and 24-second video. The link will be provided below in the description. Philanthropy can be described as making charitable donations to benefit humankind. Again, they quote Andrew Carnegie. And 136 billionaires have joined Bill and Melinda Gates in the Giving Pledge, a commitment to dedicate a majority of their wealth to philanthropy. How does being good pay off? According to one survey, 88% of the respondents said they were more apt to buy from companies that are socially responsible than from companies that are not. Employees reported higher levels of organizational commitment, job satisfaction, trust in the leader, and motivation when their managers displayed ethical leadership. So those first two, positive effect on the customers. They wanted to purchase goods and services from companies that are socially responsible. And then two, the positive effect on the employees, work attitudes, and the intentions to quit. They had higher levels of the organizational commitment, satisfaction on the job, trust in the leader, and motivation. So their intention to quit was absolutely decreased. 3 and 4, we look at positive effect on employees' behavior and work performance. Employees were more willing to display citizenship behavior and to produce higher task performance when their managers exhibited ethical leadership. Absolutely, leading by example. 4, positive effects on sales growth, company efficiency, company revenue, stock price, and profits. Studies suggest that profitability is enhanced by reputation for honesty and corporate citizenship. Corporate governance. How can I trust a company is doing the right thing? Corporate governance is carried out by an organization's board of directors. It is about such matters as long-term strategies, sustainable finances, accurate reporting, and positive work environment. What, you might ask, were the company boards of directors doing prior to 2001-2002, when Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, and Adelphia filed for bankruptcy amid allegations their CEOs were committing fraud, for which they later went to prison? Now, more attention is being paid to strengthening corporate governance so that directors are clearly separated in their authority from the CEO. While directors are not supposed to get involved with day-to-day management issues, they are now feeling more pressure from stockholders and others to have stronger financial reporting systems and more accountability. Corporate governance can be described as the system of governing a company so that the interests of corporate owners and other stakeholders are protected. And again, more attention paid to strengthening corporate governance so that directors are clearly separated in their authority from the CEO. This example, the map collector. Lack of corporate governance can lead to tragic consequences. Example from the textbook, Corporate Governance, Chesapeake Energy's CEO gets some unusual breaks from his board of directors. Aubrey McClendon resigned from Chesapeake Energy in 2013, citing, quote, philosophical differences, end quote, with a reconstituted board, after burning through $19.4 billion in 2011 and $21.6 billion in 2012. He started a new energy company using everything from a fine wine collection to his stake in Oklahoma City Thunder to fund this new venture. But in 2015, Chesapeake filed a lawsuit against him, accusing him of stealing trade secrets. In early 2016, Chesapeake lost 50% of its value amid rumors that it might be preparing to file bankruptcy. Soon after, its former CEO, Aubrey McClendon, was indicted on charges of bid rigging, of conspiring to rig bids for the purchase of oil and natural gas leases during the time he was running Chesapeake. The day after the indictment, he was found dead in his car after a high-speed crash into a concrete wall. So this Aubrey McClendon, he was the chief of natural gas producer Chesapeake Energy. He was the highest paid of CEOs in 2008. But when plunging gas prices reduced the value of the company's shares by 80%, he was forced to sell off a personal antique map collection of $12.1 million. The appraiser, the expert who assembled the collection in the first place, the buyer, Chesapeake Energy. Does this pass the smell test? Smells fishy, doesn't it?